Dear students, this lesson attempts to use the method of dialectics to understand the progress made in the literature on the subject of social stratification. In this and the next lesson, our specific focus will be on the writings of Perry van den Berge, N. Luhmann, and Gerhard Lenski, who have tried to go beyond the existing polarities in the theories of social stratification and have attempted to synthesize them into a unified theory. We shall first identify the two opposing viewpoints on the phenomenon of social inequality. That is, the conservatives who advocate that social inequalities are natural and justified, and the radicals who believe in principle of treating all human beings equally and see this as an achievable social and political goal. We can observe two parallel trends in the sociological literature on social stratification as well. The structural functionalism representing the conservative trend and the conflict or the Marxist approach representing the radical perspective. In the following sections, we shall see how a synthesis of the two opposing theories have been attempted by the above-mentioned three sociologists. Social stratification divergent. Social stratification, divergent explanations of the same phenomenon. Social inequality or social stratification is a universal phenomenon. Some degree of inequality in property, prestige, and power is found virtually in all the contemporary societies. The available historical evidence suggests that such inequalities had been characteristic of the past societies as well. Further, inequalities are socially patterned, and there is some degree of legitimacy granted to them by the society. In other words, laws and norms of a given collectively govern the prevailing systems of inequality. It is for this reason that the phenomenon of social stratification has been an important question for sociologists and the other social scientists. They have written a great deal on the subject, both in terms of descriptive accounts of the prevailing structures and practices of inequalities in different societies, as well as in terms of providing explanations or theorizing the phenomenon. Apart from sociologists and other social scientists, the phenomenon of social inequality has been a major concern among lay thinkers, philosophers, and religious leaders for a long time. While certain religions, such as Hinduism, justify inequalities among the different caste groups, other religious philosophies preached against practicing inequality and appealed to their followers to treat all human individuals equally. Similarly, the modern Western thinkers and philosophers have also been divided on this subject. There have been debates on the question whether it is right and justified to treat human beings differently and reward them unequally. We can identify two different positions on the subject. While some have taken a conservative position, others have developed a critique of the existing systems of inequalities and have offered radical alternatives. The conservative thinkers of modern Europe tried to argue that since social inequalities are found everywhere, they are natural and inevitable. In other words, they justified the existence of inequalities on various grounds. Adam Smith, a leading liberal philosopher of the modern West and founder of the modern economics, justified social inequalities by arguing in favor of the free market system. The marketplace where individuals pursue their private interests without any interference of political authority or moral principle of distribution tests the capabilities of different individuals and rewards them differently depending on their competence. Similarly, those influenced by Darwin's theory of natural selection also justified the existence of inequalities among men. The social Darwinians argued that individual men were shifted and sorted like plant and animal species. Through this process of selection, those who possessed better qualities rose to positions of prominence in society, while others formed the working masses. W.G. Sumner, for example, argued in his well-known book, Folkways, that class-based inequalities were essentially a measure of the social worth of men, which in turn was basically a measure of their native ability. The well-known Italian scholar Gaetano Mosca was another proponent of the conservative thesis. He too insisted that inequalities were an inevitable fact of life. Since human societies could never function without political organization, these organizations necessarily led to inequalities in power. However, there has also been a long tradition of radical thinking in the modern Western philosophy that argues against the conservative position. The radicals have all along been emphasizing on the point that treating human beings unequally was morally wrong. They have also been arguing that it was possible to build a society where all individuals could be treated equally with equal rights. Scholars like Locke and Rosset strongly argued that in modern democracies, all human beings should possess equal political rights. Among all the classical thinkers of modern Europe, it is in the writings of Marx and Engels that we find a most systematic and well-developed critique of the conservative position. In their writings on the political economy of capitalist development, they also offered a radical antithesis of the conservative or the liberal bourgeois position in the form of the socialist theory. The contemporary sociological perspectives on stratification. As mentioned above, we can observe interesting parallels in the manner in which the phenomenon of social inequality was explained by classical thinkers of modern Europe and the ways in which contemporary sociological theories deals with the subject of social stratification. The two dominant perspectives on this subject, the functionalist theory and the conflict theory, resemble very closely the conservative and radical viewpoints presented above. Both these perspectives begin with a normative position on the subject. The functionalist perspective or the consensus approach emphasizes the inevitability of social inequality and the positive function that it performs for the social system. The conflict theory, on the other hand, looks at the phenomenon in terms of interests that the given structures of inequality in a particular society fulfill of certain individuals and groups at the cost of others. Hence, they highlight the illegitimacy and the negative side of it. The functionalist perspective. As we know, the functionalist or the structural functionalist theories tend to look at society as an organically integrated system where different parts or units work to fulfill the essential needs of the system. They look at social stratification too in functionalist terms, that is, in terms of the needs that the patterns of social inequality fulfill for the society as a whole. Thus, for them, social inequality is not merely an inevitable fact, but also an essential requirement of the system. Talcott Parsons and Kingsley Davis are the leading functionalist theorists who have written on social stratification. As mentioned above, the basic premise of the functionalist position is that stratification arises out of the needs of societies and not from the needs and desires of individuals. According to Parsons, in every society, there are certain shared values that arise out of the needs of that society. Since the needs of all societies are more or less similar, these values also tend to be similar the world over. What differs is the relative ranking of these values. One society may value efficiency more than stability, while another may reverse the order, but every society must value both stability as well efficiency to some degree. The system of social stratification is essentially an expression of the value system of that society. The positions that measure up to the standards set by the society are rewarded more than those that are valued less. Similarly, Davis argues that stratification arises in response to two specific needs common to every human society. First, the most important positions in society ought to be fulfilled by the most competent individuals. And second, the society must reward those occupying important positions better than those occupying less important positions. Social inequality is thus an unconsciously evolved device by which societies ensure that the most important positions are consciously filled by the most qualified persons. Davis identifies two important factors that determine the magnitude of rewards attached to highly ranked positions: their functional importance for the society and the relative scarcity of qualified personnel in that category. For example, a doctor is functionally more important for society than a sweeper, and being qualified to be a doctor requires a longer period of training that makes their availability scarce in society. Hence, higher rewards for the doctor, since all positions can never be of equal importance, nor all men equally qualified for the important positions. Inequality is inevitable. Not only is it inevitable, as Davis argues, it is necessarily beneficial to everyone, since the survival and well-being of every individual is contingent on the survival and well-being of society. The conflict approach. The conflict approach draws its inspiration from the writings of Karl Marx, who developed an elaborate critique of the capitalist social order and argued for a socialist society based on the principle of social equality among all. As Lenski argues, Marx was the first scholar to offer a radical antithesis to the conservative thesis developed by the liberal economists and the functionalist sociologists. In contrast to the functionalists, the conflict theories do not approach the problem of social stratification by identifying an abstract notion of society with its own need. They view society as being formed by various individuals and groups and their needs and interests. It is these needs and interests that become the starting point for the conflict theorists. While the functionalists have no place for the concept of power in their analysis of society and social inequality, the conflict theorists begin with the question of power. Society for them is a stage where struggles take place among different groups and individuals over the available scarce resources and the socially valued positions. Those who are powerful use their strength to corner the valued positions. Those who are powerful use their strength to corner the valued resources. It is the domination of some groups over the others that perpetuates social inequality in society. For example, those who are rich are able to send their wards to good schools, and it is because of this that they are able to compete for the positions that are valued better. Since the poor cannot even afford to send their children to ordinary schools, they can never compete with the rich and the powerful. Comparing the two schools of thought, Lenski writes, where the functionalists emphasize the common interests shared by the members of a society, conflict theorists emphasize the interests which divide. Where functionalists stress the common advantages which accrue from social relationships, conflict theorists emphasize the element of domination and exploitation. Where functionalists emphasize consensus as the basis of social unity, conflict theorists emphasize coercion. Where functionalists see human societies as social systems, conflict theorists see them as stages on which struggles for power and privilege take place. The two schools of thought are generally seen as being totally opposed to each other. However, some scholars have also argued that there are many things common in the two perspectives. They argue that conflict and consensus are two sides of the same coin. A sociological theory should be able to take into account all the aspects of social reality. Some sociologists have even attempted to go beyond the polarities and develop a unified theory of society and social stratification that attempts to bring the two viewpoints together. Scholars like Dahlendorf, Lenski, Berge and Luhmann are among those who have tried to go beyond the polarities and have attempted synthesis of the two perspectives. Towards a synthesis, it was the German philosopher Hegel who, through his theory of dialectics, popularized the term synthesis. According to him, ideas or human thinking progresses through a process of opposition or negation. A particular idea or a thesis leads to the development of an opposite idea or an antithesis. Through a process of dialectics, there emerges a synthesis, another idea that integrates the valid points of both the thesis as well as the antithesis and approaches the question at a different level. As pointed out by Lenski, whereas both thesis and antithesis are essentially normative theories of inequality, that is, essentially concerned with moral evaluation and the question of justice, the synthesis is essentially analytical, that is, concerned with empirical relationships and their causes. Or in other words, while theses and antitheses are arguments made from ideological standpoints, synthesis relies on mobilization of empirical data. It is a result of modern application of the scientific method to the study of the age-old problem of human inequality. The earliest attempts to go beyond the conservative and radical positions on the question of social inequality could be seen in the writings of the German sociologist Max Weber, though he did not consciously attempt a synthesis of the two traditions. His writings on explaining social stratification, subjects like class, power, and prestige reflect an analytical treatment that incorporates valid insights from both the perspectives and goes beyond the polarities or moral positions. For example, in his discussion on the concept of class, though he agrees with Marx that it is an important aspect of the social structure, he does not subscribe to Marx's view that the existence of class inevitably leads to class conflict or class struggle. Similarly, unlike Marx, he does not look at the phenomenon of power and prestige as being always reducible to class, and still he claims that has basically attempted to advance what had been said on the structure of capitalist societies. Apart from Weber, one can see attempts to synthesize the two perspectives on social stratification in the writings of Wilfred Pareto, Pitirim Sorokin, and Stanislaw Osowski. More recently, Piri van den Berge, Gerard Lenski, and Luhmann have made such attempts. Piri van den Berge, in one of his research articles, Dialectic and Functionalism Toward a Theoretical Synthesis, published in the American Sociological Review in 1963. Piri van den Berge tried to identify the common elements in the two major traditions of sociological theorizing by using the Hegelian concept of synthesis. First, both the approaches are holistic in character as they both look at society as a system with interrelated and interdependent parts. However, the two theories have opposite views on the interrelationship of different parts. While functionalism emphasizes on he argues that functionalism and Marxian conflict theory each stresses one of two essential aspects of social reality. Not only does each theory emphasize one of two aspects of social reality, which are complementary and inextricably intertwined, but some of the analytical concepts are applicable to both approaches. However, it is not enough to say that the two theories are complementary. one should be able to show their reconcilability. According to Burge, by retaining and modifying elements of the two approaches, one can develop such a unified theory of society. He shows that the two theories converge on 4 important points. First, both the approaches are holistic in character as they both look at society as a system with interrelated and interdependent parts. However, the two theories have opposite views on the interrelationship of different parts. While functionalism emphasizes on the reciprocal interdependence of parts, the dialectical theory talks about the conflictual relations among the different parts of the system. However, both the theories have been criticized for overemphasizing one at the cost of the other. The concept of system thus needs to include both interdependence as well as conflict. Second, their concern with regard to conflict and consensus also tends to overlap, whereas functionalism regards consensus as major focus of stability and integration. The dialectical theory views conflict as a source of disintegration and revolution. However, according to Burge, the two can be reconciled into a single theory. For example, Coser has pointed to the integrative and stabilizing aspect of conflict. Instead of leading to disintegration, conflict can help the system to retain a dynamic equilibrium. Furthermore, in a number of societies, conflict is institutionalized and ritualized in a manner that seems conducive to integration. In industrial societies, for example, the existence of trade unions of the working class help in regulating industrial relations, and they work as safety valves against the possibility of a disintegrative kind of class conflict. Similarly, excessive unity among different groups can also lead to intergroup conflict in a plural society which diverse cultural groups live together. Thirdly, both functionalism and the conflict dialectical theory share the evolutionary notion of social change. Though their notion of stages and processes involved in the course of historical change differ, both nevertheless believe in the idea of progress. While the Marxian dialectical theory visualizes a process of change taking place through class struggle, functionalists attribute this change to a continuous process of social differentiation. However, as Burge argues, the two theories of change have at least one important point in common. Both theories hold that a given state of the social system presupposes all previous stages and hence contains them, if only in residual or modified form. Fourthly, Burge claims that both functionalism and dialectic conflict theories are based on an equilibrium model. In the case of functionalism, this is obvious, but the dialectic sequence of thesis, antithesis, synthesis also involves a notion of equilibrium. The dialectic conceives of society as going through alternating phases of equilibrium and disequilibrium, while the notion of equilibrium in the dialectical theory is different from the classical notion of dynamic equilibrium. The views are neither contradictory nor incompatible with a postulate of long-range tendency towards integration. Conclusion. The issue of social inequality or social stratification has been one of the most widely debated questions. It is not only sociologists who have provided conflicting theoretical explanations of the phenomenon, but it has also been a contentious issue among the lay thinkers, philosophers, and religious leaders. Though attempts have been made to synthesizing the conflicting theories by many sociologists, one of whom we have discussed above, the existing status of the question is far from satisfactory. The synthesis or the unified theories suggested by Burge have not been accepted by all the sociologists. Most functionalists remain committed to their position, and so is true of the Marxists or the other conflict theorists. Professional sociologists as well as other thinkers continue to disagree on the causes and consequences of stratification.